She slept on a piece of cardboard behind a dumpster, her only blanket a torn shower curtain she'd found in the trash. Her name was Elena, and she was 23 years old. Every night, she prayed the same prayer. Please, just let me survive until morning. What she didn't know was that tomorrow morning, everything would change. A black car would pull up. A man would step out, and her life would never be the same again. Elena woke up at 4:30 in the morning, just like she did every day. The alley smelled like rotting garbage and stale urine, but she'd gotten used to it. She folded her cardboard carefully and tucked it behind the dumpster where no one would take it. That cardboard was hers. It was the only thing she owned that kept her off the cold concrete. She splashed water on her face from a public fountain 2 blocks away, used the restroom at a gas station that opened early, and tried to make herself look presentable. Her clothes were worn but clean. She washed them every 3 days in that same fountain, late at night when no one was watching. By 6 in the morning, she was standing outside the estate where she worked, waiting for the gate to open. The house belonged to the Caldwell family. Mrs. Caldwell was a lawyer, her husband was a doctor, and they had 3 children who barely looked at Elena when she served them breakfast. Elena worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. She cleaned, she cooked, she did laundry, and she scrubbed floors on her hands and knees. For all of that, she earned $300 a week. It wasn't enough for rent, not even a room in a shared apartment, so she slept outside. She told no one. Not the Caldwells, not the other staff, not anyone. She was terrified they'd fire her if they knew. People didn't want to hire someone homeless. They thought it made you unreliable, dirty, and dangerous. So Elena kept her secret, and every night, she returned to her cardboard and her dumpster. On this particular morning, Mrs. Caldwell was in a foul mood. She screamed at Elena for leaving a water spot on a glass. She threw a plate of eggs in the trash and told Elena to make fresh ones because the first batch was too runny. Elena apologized quietly, redid the eggs, and kept her head down. By noon, her feet ached. By 3 in the evening, her back throbbed. By 6, when her shift ended, she could barely stand. But she smiled, said goodnight to the Caldwells, and walked out the gate. She walked 4 blocks to a small park where she sat on a bench and ate the sandwich she'd made from leftovers the Caldwells hadn't finished. A woman walking her dog smiled at her. A jogger passed by. No one knew that in a few hours, Elena would be back in that alley, lying on cardboard, staring up at the stars and wondering how much longer she could keep going. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. It was a Tuesday morning, and Elena was running late. She'd overslept because it had rained the night before, and she'd spent hours trying to stay dry under a piece of plastic she'd found. By the time the rain stopped, it was past midnight, and she was shivering so badly she couldn't sleep. When she finally did drift off, she slept through her internal alarm. She woke up at 5:15, panicked, and ran the entire way to the Caldwell estate. She was sweating, out of breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She made it to the gate at 6:05. Mrs. Caldwell was waiting. Her arms were crossed, her face twisted in anger. "You're late," she said coldly. Elena stammered an apology. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Caldwell. It won't happen again." Mrs. Caldwell didn't respond. She just turned and walked back into the house. Elena knew what that meant. She was on thin ice. One more mistake, and she'd be gone. She worked faster that day, scrubbing harder, moving quicker. She didn't take a lunch break. She didn't sit down once. By the time her shift ended, she was exhausted. Her legs felt like they might give out. She walked to the park, sat on her usual bench, and ate her sandwich in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For a moment, Elena felt something close to peace. But it didn't last. As she stood to leave, she saw him. A man was standing near the edge of the park, leaning against a black car. He was tall, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples. He wore a suit that looked like it cost more than Elena made in a year. He was on his phone, speaking in a low voice, his expression serious. Elena didn't think much of it. Rich people came to this park sometimes. She turned to leave, but as she walked past him, something happened. A teenager on a skateboard came flying down the path, completely out of control. He crashed into Elena, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. Pain shot through her knee and her palms as she hit the ground. The teenager didn't stop. He didn't even look back. Elena sat there, stunned, staring at the blood seeping through her jeans. The man in the suit was beside her in seconds. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice urgent. Elena nodded quickly, trying to stand. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. Her knee buckled, and she would have fallen again if he hadn't caught her. "You're bleeding," he said, his eyes scanning her injuries. "Let me take you to a hospital." Elena shook her head quickly. No, I can't afford that." The man frowned. "I'll pay for it." Elena looked at him, startled. "You don't have to do that." He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her pause. Something kind, something genuine. "I want to," he said simply. His name was Daniel Ross, and he was exactly what Elena had guessed. Rich, successful, powerful. He owned a chain of hotels across the country and had more money than most people could imagine. But as he helped Elena into his car, as he drove her to a private clinic and paid for her treatment without hesitation, Elena saw something else. She saw a man who looked tired, a man who looked lonely. The doctor cleaned her wounds, bandaged her knee, and told her to rest for a few days. Elena thanked him quietly, then turned to Daniel. "I really appreciate this," she said, "but I need to get back." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Back where?" Elena hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth. "Home," she said softly. Daniel didn't push. He drove her back to the park and offered her his business card. "If you need anything, call me," he said. Elena took the card, thanked him again, and watched as he drove away. She looked down at the card in her hand. Daniel Ross, CEO, Ross International Hotels. She almost threw it away. What would a man like that ever do for someone like her? But something made her tuck it into her pocket instead. 3 days later, Elena's knee was still throbbing, but she couldn't afford to miss work. She showed up at the Caldwell estate at 6 in the morning, limping slightly, and got to work. "Mrs. Caldwell noticed immediately. "What's wrong with your leg?" she asked, her tone sharp. Elena forced a smile. "I just tripped. It's nothing." "Mrs. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "You better not let it slow you down." Elena nodded and got back to work, but the pain was getting worse. By midday, she could barely put weight on her leg. She was scrubbing the kitchen floor when Mrs. Caldwell walked in and saw her wincing. "I don't pay you to sit around and feel sorry for yourself," she snapped. Elena bit her lip and kept scrubbing. But something inside her was breaking. That evening, when her shift ended, Elena didn't go to the park. She went straight to her alley. She lay down on her cardboard and stared up at the sky. Her knee was swollen, her body ached, and for the first time in months, she let herself cry. She cried for the life she used to have before her parents died. She cried for the apartment she used to rent before she lost her job. She cried for the friends who had abandoned her when she couldn't pay her share of the bills. She cried until there were no tears left. And then she pulled out Daniel's business card. She stared at it for a long time. What would she even say? "Hi, remember me? The homeless girl you helped? I need money." She felt sick at the thought, but she was desperate. She had nothing left to lose. The next morning, instead of going to work, Elena called the number on the card. A woman answered, professional and polite. "Ross International Hotels. How may I direct your call?" Elena's voice shook. "I need to speak to Daniel Ross." There was a pause. "May I ask who's calling?" Elena hesitated. "My name is Elena." He gave me his card. Another pause. "Please hold." The line went silent, and Elena's heart pounded. She almost hung up. But then a voice came on. "This is Daniel." Elena's throat tightened. "Hi, this is Elena. We met a few days ago. You took me to the clinic." Daniel's voice softened immediately. Elena, of course. How's your knee? Tears pricked her eyes at the simple kindness in his tone. It's okay. I just wanted to thank you again. There was a pause. Is that the only reason you called? Elena's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have bothered you. She was about to hang up when Daniel spoke again. Wait, where are you right now? Elena told him she was at the park. 20 minutes later, Daniel's black car pulled up. He stepped out, and Elena saw the concern in his eyes. You're not okay, he said. It wasn't a question. Elena tried to hold it together, but she couldn't. The walls she'd built around herself for so long came crashing down. I don't have anywhere to live, she said, her voice breaking. I sleep in an alley. I work 12 hours a day, and I still can't afford rent. I'm so tired. I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm not. Daniel didn't say anything. He just listened. And when she was done, when she'd poured out every painful detail of her life, he said something that changed everything. Come with me. Elena stared at him. What? Daniel's expression was serious. I have a guest house on my property. It's empty. You can stay there. Elena shook her head quickly. I can't accept that. I don't even know you. Daniel smiled faintly. Then get to know me. Let me help you, Elena. Please. Elena didn't understand why he was doing this. She didn't understand why a billionaire would care about a homeless maid, but she was too exhausted to argue, too desperate to refuse. So she nodded, and she got in his car. Daniel's estate was like something out of a dream. The main house was massive, with tall white columns and perfectly manicured gardens. The guest house was smaller, but still nicer than any place Elena had ever lived. It had a bedroom, a bathroom, a small kitchen, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Daniel showed her around, then handed her a key. This is yours, he said, for as long as you need it. Elena's hands trembled as she took the key. I don't know how to thank you. Daniel shook his head. You don't have to thank me. Just rest. Take care of yourself. He left her alone, and Elena stood in the middle of the guest house, unable to believe this was real. She walked into the bathroom and saw herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, her hair tangled. She looked like a ghost. She turned on the shower and stood under the hot water for what felt like hours, washing away months of dirt and exhaustion and shame. When she finally stepped out, she felt lighter, cleaner, almost human again. That night, she slept in a real bed for the first time in 8 months. The sheets were soft, the mattress was comfortable, and for the first time in so long, she felt safe. She woke up the next morning and didn't know what to do. She walked to the main house and knocked on the door. A woman in her 50s answered. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. You must be Elena, she said. I'm Margaret, Daniel's housekeeper. He told me you'd be staying in the guest house. Are you hungry? Elena nodded, and Margaret led her to the kitchen. She made Elena breakfast, eggs and toast and fresh fruit, and they sat together at the table. Daniel's a good man, Margaret said. He doesn't do things like this often, but when he does, it's because he genuinely cares. Elena didn't know what to say. She still didn't understand why Daniel was helping her. Over the next few days, she stayed in the guest house, resting, healing. Daniel checked on her every evening after work. They talked about small things at first, the weather, books, movies, but slowly, the conversations grew deeper. Elena learned that Daniel's wife had died 3 years ago, cancer. He'd spent every day by her side until the very end. I threw myself into work after she passed, he said quietly one evening. I thought if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have to feel the loss. But it didn't work. I just ended up lonely. Elena understood that feeling. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was 19, she said. I had to drop out of college. I worked 3 jobs just to survive. But then, I got sick, missed too much work, and lost all 3 jobs at once. I couldn't pay rent. I lost my apartment. And I've been on the streets ever since. Daniel looked at her with something that looked like admiration. You're stronger than you think, he said. Elena shook her head. I don't feel strong. I feel broken. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Broken things can be mended, he said softly. Weeks turned into months, and Elena's life began to change in ways she'd never imagined. Daniel didn't just let her stay in the guest house. He helped her enroll in community college so she could finish her degree. He introduced her to people who could help her find work. But more than that, he became her friend. They spent evenings together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. They watched movies in his home theater. They took walks through his gardens. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, something deeper began to grow. Elena found herself thinking about Daniel when he wasn't around. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She noticed how he listened when she spoke, really listened, like her words mattered. And Daniel found himself looking forward to the evenings when Elena would knock on his door. He loved her laugh. He loved the way she saw the world, with hope despite everything she'd been through. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset. Daniel turned to her and said, "Can I ask you something?" Elena nodded. "Why did you call me that day?" Elena thought about it for a moment. "Because I didn't have anyone else," she admitted. "And because something about you made me feel like maybe I could trust you." Daniel smiled. "I'm glad you did." There was a long pause. Then Daniel said, "I need to tell you something." Elena's heart skipped. "What is it?" Daniel took a breath. "I've been alone for a long time. After my wife died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. But then I met you, and you made me remember what it feels like to care about someone, to want to protect someone, to want to see them happy." Elena's breath caught. "Daniel." He looked into her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you, Elena." Tears filled her eyes. "You can't," she whispered. "Why not?" She shook her head. "Because I'm nobody. I'm a maid who slept on cardboard. You're a billionaire. This doesn't make sense." Daniel reached out and gently cupped her face. "It makes perfect sense to me." And then he kissed her. It was soft and tentative and filled with all the emotions neither of them knew how to put into words. When they pulled apart, Elena was crying. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be loved." Daniel smiled gently. "Then let me show you." 6 months later, Elena had transformed. She'd finished her degree and gotten a job as an administrative assistant at one of Daniel's hotels. She'd made friends. She'd rebuilt her life. But more than that, she'd fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with Daniel. He was patient with her. He never rushed her. He let her heal at her own pace. And in return, she loved him with a fierceness that surprised even herself. One evening, Daniel took her to a restaurant overlooking the ocean. It was the kind of place Elena had only ever seen in movies. They sat by the window, watching the waves crash against the shore. After dinner, Daniel stood up and extended his hand. "Walk with me?" Elena nodded, and they walked down to the beach. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water. Daniel stopped and turned to face her. "Elena," he said, his voice steady but his eyes filled with emotion. "You came into my life when I'd given up on feeling anything real. You reminded me what it means to care, to hope, to love." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Elena's heart stopped. Daniel dropped to one knee. "I don't care that we come from different worlds. I don't care what anyone thinks. I only care about you. Marry me, Elena. Let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." Elena couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and they held each other on that beach. Two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. They were married 3 months later in a small, intimate ceremony. Elena wore a simple white dress, and Daniel wore a suit. Margaret cried. A few of Daniel's closest friends attended. And Elena, who'd spent so many nights sleeping on cardboard, stood beside the man she loved and promised to spend forever with him. The months that followed were the happiest of Elena's life. She moved into the main house with Daniel. She woke up every morning beside him. She learned what it felt like to be cherished, but she never forgot where she came from. She started volunteering at a homeless shelter, serving meals and handing out blankets. She used her story to inspire others, to remind them that no matter how low you fall, it's possible to rise again. Daniel supported her in everything. He donated to the shelter, he created a fund to help homeless women get back on their feet, and he fell even more in love with his wife every single day. One evening, about a year after their wedding, Elena and Daniel were sitting in their living room. Elena had something to tell him, and she was nervous. "Daniel," she said softly. He looked up from his book. "What is it?" She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, Daniel just stared at her. And then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "We're going to have a baby?" Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. Daniel kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You've given me everything," he whispered. "Everything I thought I'd lost." And in that moment, Elena realized something. She'd spent so many years believing she was worthless, believing she didn't deserve love, or happiness, or a future. But she'd been wrong. She deserved all of it, and she'd found it in the most unexpected place. Elena gave birth to a daughter 9 months later. They named her Grace. She had Daniel's eyes and Elena's smile, and she was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. As Elena held her daughter in her arms for the first time, she thought about the girl she used to be. The girl who slept behind a dumpster. The girl who thought she'd never escape. And she wept, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to Daniel, who was sitting beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. "For what?" he asked. Elena looked at him through her tears. "For seeing me, for believing I was worth saving." Daniel shook his head. "You saved yourself, Elena. I just gave you a safe place to land." Years passed. Grace grew into a bright, curious child. Elena continued her work with the homeless, and Daniel continued to support her. They built a life together that was rooted in love, compassion, and the knowledge that second chances are real. One day, when Grace was 5 years old, Elena took her to the park where she'd first met Daniel. They sat on the same bench where Elena used to eat her sandwiches. "Mommy, why do we come here?" Grace asked. Elena smiled. "Because this is where my life changed, sweetheart. This is where I met your daddy." Grace looked around. "It's a nice park." Elena laughed softly. "Yes, it is." She looked at her daughter, at her bright eyes and her innocent smile, and she felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly took her breath away. "Grace, I want you to remember something," Elena said. "No matter how hard life gets, no matter how lost you feel, there's always hope. Always. You just have to hold on long enough to find it." Grace nodded seriously, even though Elena knew she was too young to fully understand. But one day she would. One day, Elena would tell her daughter the whole story. About the cardboard and the dumpster and the nights she thought she wouldn't survive. About the man in the black car who stopped to help. About the love that changed everything. But for now, Elena just held her daughter's hand and watched the sunset, grateful for every single moment. Because she'd learned the most important lesson of all. That sometimes, when you're at your lowest, when you've lost everything and you're ready to give up, life sends you exactly what you need. Not what you expect, not what you think you deserve, but what you need. And for Elena, that had been Daniel, her savior, her partner, her love. Today, Elena and Daniel still live in that house with the white columns and the beautiful gardens. Grace is now 10 years old, thriving in school, and already showing the same compassion her mother has. Elena runs a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping homeless women and children. She speaks at events, shares her story, and reminds people that everyone deserves dignity and a chance at a better life. Daniel continues to run his business, but he's scaled back to spend more time with his family, because he learned, through Elena, that success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. Sometimes, late at night, after Grace is asleep, Elena and Daniel sit on their porch and talk about how far they've come. Do you ever think about that day in the park? Daniel asks. Elena smiles. Every single day. Daniel takes her hand. I'm so glad that kid on the skateboard crashed into you. Elena laughs. That's a terrible thing to say. Daniel grins. But it's true. If it hadn't happened, I might never have spoken to you, and I can't imagine my life without you. Elena leans her head on his shoulder. I can't imagine mine without you either. And as they sit there together, surrounded by the life they've built, Elena thinks about that girl who used to sleep on cardboard, that girl who thought she had nothing. And she realizes that she'd been wrong. She'd always had something. She'd had hope. She'd had strength. She'd had the courage to ask for help when she needed it most. And that had made all the difference. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't do it alone. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is accept love when it's offered. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is believe that you deserve a happy ending. So to anyone watching this, anyone who's struggling, anyone who feels like they're drowning and no one can see them, Elena wants you to know something. You matter. Your story matters. And no matter how dark it gets, there's always a chance for light. You just have to hold on. You just have to keep going. Because you never know when your black car will pull up. You never know when your Daniel will appear. You never know when your life will change. But it will, if you let it. If you believe in it. If you fight for it. And that, more than anything, is what Elena's story teaches us. That hope is real. That love is real. That second chances are real. And that no matter where you start, no matter how low you fall, you can rise again. You can build a life worth living. You can find happiness. You can find love. You can find home. Just like Elena did. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched you, please let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, or just let us know you're here. We read every single comment, and your words mean the world to us. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week. Stories of hope, resilience, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, no matter what you're going through, you're not alone. Your story matters, and we're here, listening. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.